computer. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Chuck Lind, and most of us know me, and we have a special evening with Roger Briggs. Some of the core group here read the full book, and I've invited other people who just had a chance to explore a little bit. As one person mentioned, you can just watch the presentation that Roger did on YouTube, which I have, indicated that that's an alternative if you don't have time to buy the book, and maybe it will inspire you to buy the book and read the whole thing. But I'll just start off by saying that Roger, without making a big introduction, I think I've told most people and quoted him in the newsletters that I put out, and I'm assuming everybody has read all of that carefully. When I put these long newsletters out there, you browse through them to the end. Anyway, Paul Carlson and I took a course on that David Sloan Wilson put together, a well-known evolutionary biologist who had the insight, as most of us here do have, that change happens from the bottom up. And when that happens, it's not just at the evolutionary, organic, molecular, cellular levels, it's at the cultural levels, because the universe is all of a piece, and the way change happens culturally, and this was David Sloan Wilson's insight. He had the idea, and it has a thing called pro-social, to kind of extend the ideas of his work in evolutionary biology to include the cultural aspects. And he was a fan and was inspired by Teilhard de Chardin, who had a vision of kind of similar to what Roger's planetary civilization idea was, that there was this evolution of consciousness, and that it would become part of a planetary civilization, a global awareness, which certainly we are in at some level or another. And David Sloan Wilson pointed out that we needed to create the ideal global. I forget now. I won't get all the words right. My excuse now is an advanced age. So if I can't remember the name of the person, you feel free, or if you're, especially if you're unmuted, just say, "Hey, Chuck, it's so and so." Anyway, that class is where I met Roger, and for some reason, it was on this platform that I was not familiar with, but somehow I stumbled onto this guy who's written a book called Emerging World, the evolution of consciousness and the future of humanity. And I thought, man, that's what I want out of this course. We didn't really get as much of that as I would have liked in the course itself, speaking for myself. But I think I immediately recognized, bought, I have some vision problems, so I bought the e-version of the book right away. And I love that, because instantly you have it. You have to wait for the, I do have paper copies of it, but in any case, I recognize that Simply Living's values and my own personal writings that I've done, some of you are familiar with them, Paul certainly is, on medium.com. Again, I have the same, I would say, optimistic, I fully accept that we're in a really big polycrisis predicament, for inflection point, turning point for the human species. Okay, it's not looking good. On the other hand, you can, Marilyn and I were talking about this earlier. You had a great quote. You should put that in the chat there, Marilyn. In any case, there are so many good things happening. Paul Hawken is fond of, he wrote this book called, okay, tell me what the name of the book was.
Blessed Unrest?
Blessed Unrest. Thank you, Paul. And Blessed Unrest was just a collection, kind of a database that was kind of a precursor of some of the work that Roger's done on the Planet Project, which I've referred, and I hope all of you have a chance, if you haven't done it, spend time on the Planet Project, because I want Simply Living to be part of that, kind of that affiliated recognition that this is our vision, and Planet Project is trying to spread this word internationally, and we want to be part of that big picture. And I think we have a little bit of a unique position of doing a lot of stuff locally for many years, and with the example of making people more aware of that we're part of a whole system. Ecological awareness is lifestyle changes to match what we know needs to happen, including systemic changes that need to happen. Okay, so I know I talk a lot. It's too much. This session, we just decided at the during the book club that, well, wouldn't it be great to have Roger come on and like ask him questions about what's happening with your work, Roger. And I think I could just start off with a general one, which we kind of came up with, which is how has your book been received? What's the status of your vision in terms of is it evolving? I know it's a very comprehensive vision, but any thoughts you had? What the book is a couple of years old, right? And you've been thinking about this for a long time. And for those of you who haven't read the full book, the details in the book go into a great deal in terms of the evolution of primates and through the lens of as primates evolved into the human beings, current modern human, there was a process which was very much reflected in the uniqueness of the evolution of the consciousness as a culture. Okay, so the different ways in which culture has evolved through this lens of the primate evolution is a really solid, rock solid background for projecting as to what's going to happen in the future. And there's a lot more detail in the book than we probably will go into tonight in terms of Roger's copious citing of predecessors, people who have had similar ideas, people I'd never heard of that are right on the same page. So it's been great. So in that sense, I will just turn it over to Roger to have a few comments on where things are now.
Okay, Chuck, thanks. I'll maybe say some general things, but I'm very open to if we want to get into discussion or questions. I actually pulled up a few slides with some key ideas. We can look at those or not. But let me first of all say, just looking at the Simply Living slides that I saw and what you've created, I mean, I think you're way ahead. I'm really envious of what you guys have created on the ground, and we're trying to do, tiny little steps like that here. So I'd be very interested in, learning and looking at what you're doing. And ultimately, where this is all going, to jump to the end, Chuck, and your question of how it's evolved, is there is a huge ecosystem emerging globally that I've fallen into, I will say, and I'm happy to share more what that's about. But and much of our work in the Planet Project, which was something that came out of this book, after I sent the book off to the publisher, then I felt like, well, I had to do something. So I attracted a few people in, and we've built this thing. And so anyway, that's kind of where things are right now. But there's much of our philosophy is about partnering, creating the connections, collaborating. We do not, and I do not think I have the answers or the program we're selling or anything like that. The wisdom is all out there, and much of the evolution of consciousness, everyone here really gets that. So I really know that I'm preaching to the choir. I've languaged it in some ways, and part of my work is to try to bring this more to the mainstream world. My book has not sold a lot because I have not promoted it. It came through me. I didn't write it to try to become a writer or income or famous. I had an entire career like many of us, and it was very rewarding. And now it's just about what can I do to serve and to try to catalyze this transition that is so important. So on the other hand, the book has opened some very, very important doors for me. There are certain people that have read it that have said, wow, this really, I had all these things floating around, and this really helped me put it all together into this big picture, which is exactly what I had hoped. I'm just sharing my big picture. And so the book has become very important for me and the world. And no, not that many people have read it. And a lot of people aren't going to be able to read it. A lot of people aren't even reading these days. So that's kind of the status of things. And I might just say overall, and I could get into some slides and kind of sum up a few ideas, but the key thing that I'm presenting in this book is what I would call a new framework for anthropology. Now, that's pretty crazy. I'm not an anthropologist. I don't even have a PhD. I'm not a scholar, any of that. But by connecting dots and pulling together pieces from Merlin Donald and Jean Gebser and Arthur Young and David Bohm, et cetera, I think I've put something together that no one else really has quite nailed in this way. And until someone shows that it's wrong or there's something wrong with it, I'm sticking to my story. But it says it really leads us right up to the polycrisis or whatever we call it today, and helps us understand where we are in this trajectory and points very clearly in a future direction. And I think you all inherently understand that, but I've just languaged it in some ways and structured it in some ways.
Well,
So maybe that's enough said, and I'll see if there's any feedback on what people would like to do.
well, I want to say that you've languaged it so beautifully. I've written a couple of very long things and a few shorter ones on medium.com. Now I have to go back and review it and start integrating some of the language that you're using, Roger, because that's what hit me is that, and for those who I didn't do a formal introduction, Roger was a high school physics teacher. I'm a retired educator myself, several of us are, and I totally relate to secondary education. But Roger has won awards as a teacher. And after I read that, I thought, oh my God, what a teacher to be able to explain things in such amazing clarity. And I think I agree with you, Roger. It's definitely a major contribution as a framework that's been languaged in such a way that it does reach ordinary people who are not necessarily thinking about this big picture. So yeah, wonderful. And I can't, again, so I sort of imagine what you just said, that this book is not about becoming a bestseller. It's reaching people. And I've known some other people who have done that. And Paul Carlson's writing a book too. We haven't seen it yet, but he's working on it. And but I think unless people are welcome to raise your hand, or you can just you can do it with a computer hand, or you can just raise your hand because we see everybody, and you can put your and just put your question out there. But I think it might be helpful, Roger, if it's set up so you can share your screen. And I think a couple of things would be good refreshers for people. And some people are relatively new. They've seen the presentation, or they just think, we've got a core group of people that typically participate in my book clubs, Simply Living book clubs. We've done a variety of them, and I've got ideas for the next one. I think I'm going to do it in person this time. I'm tired of nothing against the Zoom, but the last time we're so addicted to the Zoom. It's very hard to get people out of their house these days, and I'm a victim of that myself. I have a hard time with it, but I also, maybe we can at least do a couple in person and then continue them as we wish. But go ahead, Roger, and let me know if you have any problems doing it.
Okay, so for people especially that haven't read the book, or I just might want to emphasize, there's so much in it. It's so big that sometimes you might lose like what is really the point. And I've been reflecting on that. So, okay, am I coming up there?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this up there, putting away the little windows. So the first chapter, which is quite long and ponderous, is really about evolution. That's what it's titled, and the whole idea is we now have this much bigger idea and understanding of evolution, that it just wasn't the evolution of life, and that we have these three major domains. And I think it was Teilhard, really, Desjardins, who maybe first articulated this of these major domains. And so the first one we might call is cosmic evolution. And so the science now, and I always like to drop back into the astrophysics or whatever, we know there's the age of the universe is this number 13.8 billion years old. And I like the term big breath that Jude Currivan has coined rather than big bang, like this violent thing. But because really we're understanding this evolutionary impulse as this kind of this big exhale that's still happening. That is what blew the breath of life into the universe to evolve in the way that it is. But the really short story of cosmic evolution is, what is the universe doing? And my answer to that, I'd love to have a scientist tell me I'm wrong, it's making stars and planets. That is the main thing going on in the universe. So prodigious star formation began very early on, and we have very good understanding. The physics of stars is really relatively simple, and we've viewed so many of them. We really understand how they live and die and what they do. They produce elements, they produce energy, and the most important thing, maybe, they produce planets. That when stars form, planets are part of it. They're really not separate from the star. So the universe is churning out incredible numbers of planets going around stars, star systems. And the number of those, if I like to throw out the analogy of, if you can imagine the number of grains of sand on all the beaches of the earth. Someone has estimated that. There's a number, it's 10 to the 18th. It might be 10 to the 17th or 10 to the 19th, but it's right about in there. We know there's more planets than that, if you can imagine that. So we get this idea that, okay, so the Earth formed about 2/3 of the way through the life of the universe. And odds are there have been, many, many Earths, even though we have not for sure found too many. But of course, when that Earth was suitable for life, and so we get the evolution of life or biological evolution, we all learned about that in school. That in itself is an astounding story. And it's now becoming more widely accepted that the sort of materialist Darwinian explanation of just a random walk really cannot account for us being here, or really hardly any of it, DNA. And I just read a piece by Irvin Laszlo that really, really articulates this. It's in the Holo Movement book. So then we get the evolution of life. We're all much more versed in that. And then about 3 million years ago, this third major form of evolution that the scientists, people like David Sloan Wilson, are comfortable to call it cultural evolution. And this is the beginning of the human phenomenon. That is what the book that Teilhard de Chardin wrote is, it's the human phenomenon. And this phenomenon of mind sharing, and then the evolution of consciousness. So that's the big picture as far as evolution. Then jumping to what my work really focuses on is that last piece, that evolution of culture. And I draw from, these are my two heroes, and Gebser, who surprisingly not that many people have heard of in the US especially, but he was really the first person. He coined the term integral, the integral consciousness that has been highly co-opted since then. And we have the integral philosophy, et cetera. But he, in the 1930s, was really the father of that and this stage theory. But he couldn't really understand, he didn't have the anthropology to really understand the early years, really much before the Greeks in his time. Merlin Donald is a bona fide scholar, Canadian, still alive, cognitive psychologist, neuroscientist, cultural anthropologist, all that rolled together. I read this book of his, and he's saying something very similar to Gebser 30 years later. And I had to know, when I read it, have you ever heard of Gebser? And so it took me a few years, but I finally tracked him down and sent an email, and lo and behold, he replied. And I asked him that question. He said, no, I'd never heard of Gebser, except a colleague recently told me about him. But so anyway, it just really blew me away that the way these two come together. So we get this these stages that I've proposed, and the names. The name mimetic comes from Merlin Donald. Magical comes from Gebser. Many people recognize the mythical structure of culture and consciousness when spoken language probably emerged, the narrative traditions, all this. And then not that widely recognized is the significance of the beginning of civilization. Many people cite the Axial Age, that's about 2,500 years ago, classical Greece, the Buddha and Confucius and all those guys. But the threshold event was really the power structures and the manipulation of the material world that emerged with civilization. And so I call this the beginning of the material culture and the material consciousness. And we can associate all these characteristics. I won't go through all this, but we can all recognize, and part of my work is for us to recognize the stage that we are in that really goes back 5,000 years. Some people talk about, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the birth of capitalism. That's when our troubles began. It's much deeper than that. This entire worldview that we have of the world as objects, separate objects that we can manipulate in this very egoic fashion. So that's my framework. And each of these, I'll just point out quickly, it is associated with a fairly major evolutionary transition, as the biologists are calling that. And the mimetic is signaled by the beginning of tool making, which is something that no other life forms have mastered to any appreciable degree. There was kind of a missing piece for me until a few months ago with this beginning of the magical, or this time about 1 million years ago. Lo and behold, I just read a newly published paper that says, we found this evidence, this big gap in the fossil record, that there was some kind of like a near extinction event, 800,000, 900,000 years ago. And so, all right, there it is. The time around 60,000 years ago is widely acknowledged. I think it just jumps out in the archaeological record. And this is when humans finally left Africa and covered the planet. There was, the Great Leap, it's been called. And then the birth of civilization, we suddenly see these structures, pyramids, and these hierarchical societies and all this. It did not exist at all in the past. So that's the framework. And ultimately then is what Gebser really ties together is culture and consciousness. That in the lower left there, that C squared spiral is my shorthand name for this synergy between culture and consciousness, which I think of as culture is manifested out in the world, but it's sourced from consciousness. And Merlin Donald pointed out that culture becomes our environment now. We're no longer constrained by the physical environment, which we mastered around 60,000 years ago, really. Arguably, you could say natural selection kind of no longer applied to us. But this new kind of evolution came about at that time. So anyway, this is the main framework, and we get into things about what is the nature of consciousness, and I don't know how much you would want to get into that. I think maybe I just have a couple of other slides. I've attempted to language the planetary consciousness, which is what the whole case I'm making is that this current regime of consciousness is collapsing. That is why we have what's going on in the world today. We are transitioning to this new kind of consciousness, which has been given many names. Um, Unitive consciousness, integral consciousness, on and on and on. I've attempted to sort of put out markers, like what are the characteristics, what are the look fors, and most of us would be very familiar with these things. I think I'll just jump to the last slide because it's kind of the theory of change for our work now, and then you didn't see from there. Let me just start with this. This is a graphic we use a lot to introduce kind of the concept of the Planet Project, which is the organization I'm working in. And that gray oval there, of course, is all our problems, the problems of the day, the meta crisis. And we pose the question, is it possible that these are really just symptoms, or that these are, fires burning that we're trying to put out? And we have the whole nonprofit world focused on these problems. It's all about problem solving, but underlying all of them really is our worldview that, I've called the material culture or consciousness. This idea that the world is just this inert, dead thing of objects that we can do whatever we want, extract and exploit, and applied to people as well, that other humans are just objects. And so if you really think about it, that separateness, as it's been called, the paradigm of separation, coupled with the egoic structure of self. And part of what I think is a very important idea is that the self is a part of consciousness. And I noticed that almost everyone, from the Buddhists to the philosophers, really kind of debunk the existence of self. I think that's a very dangerous, slippery slope. It is how we experience the world. I mean, who is it experiencing it? But my contention is that a major characteristic of this material culture is what I call this egoic stage of self, which we all know what that is. But it's not just the self, and we're transcending beyond the egoic stage. And it's this, which turns into the power structures, and it's really what's kind of behind a lot of the dynamics. And we still have abuses of power and centralized power going on. So, but the idea is that it is this material culture that is what we really need to change, that we can address problems one by one, and we've got to put out fires when they're burning. So I do not belittle at all the efforts of 350.org and all the good works. But if we do not get to the roots of it, it's really, we're going to be just back to endlessly putting out fires. And as Chuck said, we know it's not going well. So the big project, as I like to call it, that many people are working on, is how to make this transition, this shift. There's different approaches. I've just listed a few of the organizations that you're probably familiar with, including ours. Working in this space, I kind of generally call it the evolutionary space or the transition space. In the last 6 months or so, I've been having a lot of conversations with people around the world, and almost everyone acknowledges that there's really a ecosystem it's been kind of I wouldn't say dormant, but not trying to birth for quite a few years. I think a lot of you have been part of this and know about this, but the very recently, all of a sudden, and I think Zoom has been a part of it, because I'm Zooming 10 to 15 hours a week now with people all over the world. And that, I think, is really catalyzed it. So much of my work right now is around trying to figure out a way to really synergize and create resonance among these organizations, not to create the big new ultimate one that takes over all this, but to empower everyone to do their best work. Most organizations need money, to try to get a unified messaging campaign. I really think that the mainstream media going out to the young people is the really low-hanging fruit. I don't know how to do that, but we can hire and find young people to do that. It's a very intergenerational thing that has to happen right now. And we are starting to have conversations with young people, some university and high school students, some really bright ones. And I'm really convinced that they are really ready for this. Really, they just need some encouragement. Like, you're not crazy. This is you're spot on, and we need to all come together and throw everything we can at this. So I think that's maybe a good place to leave it, and gives you a broad, sweeping view of kind of what I'm up to.
Well, clearly I made the right choice in asking Roger to share the slides because I figured they would be some of them I've already stolen and put in some of my newsletter updates. But
Good.
and he's also has an amazing kind of directory database of all these hundreds of organizations that through the different specialized lenses are addressing the overall problem. And I'll just say, especially since Marilyn's here, I'm seeing her face. We were, and actually, Brian Swim was part of the course that we talked about, the TAR of the evolution, and we and Simply Living spent a lot of time reading the universe story with Thomas Berry and watching all 10 these VHS versions of the Canticle of the Cosmos. So that part is something that, the evolutionary sweep, and he calls it the flowing forth, or the Roger's big breath, and it's still exhaling. I love, I like the idea that evolution didn't stop, it's still going on. And anyway, I thought that was wonderful, and I think well, I've forgotten what I was going to say, but let's just open it up to anybody who has a question. Want pop up, raise your, I see Eugene has his hand up and his other hand. So Eugene.
Yeah, Roger, are you familiar with the term indigo children?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Well, years ago, out on the West Coast, I met some families who had young children, and their parents, in these cases, referred to a particular child of theirs as being an indigo child. And I was talking to these children, and they seemed incredibly wise for their age, in the sense of being able to sense the environment around them rather than just their self needs and their self awareness. Um, not interested in toys so much, but rather interested in the complex world around them. And I haven't heard that term mentioned in recent times, but do you think this is part of the new evolution of the human brain, perhaps? As you talked about the sudden change 60,000 years ago, perhaps there's this other change, which is going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of debunk or would push back on that label, indigo children, and that's been quite a while ago now. So they're probably in their 30s or 40s now, or I don't know, because I see this everywhere now. It's not, and as a teacher, I saw all these generations of kids coming through, and I remember some of the grouchy teachers bitching about, oh, this class now they're so self-centered or whatever, these kind of labels. And I just never, I see this much grander sort of evolution. And I think it probably is. My own theory is there's epigenetic changes happening in the brain. And that has to do with, resetting the DNA to allow the brain, my theory of reality is that this world we see, this material world of objects, it's like a switch set in our brains that's very filtered down. And if you take ayahuasca or one of these hallucinogenics, it blows those all apart, opens up those filters, and like there's a hell of a lot more going on there. And I think we are going through literally the evolution of DNA, or actually the regulation of DNA in this epigenetic level, that is actually happening. And I think maybe it started happening with my generation, a lot of us back in the 60s, and things that happened there. So anyway, the kids though today that I see, I am so optimistic, and we're just have made the decision to kind of direct as much of our work as possible on the young people. They're the ones to carry this out. I think the older people hold the wisdom and a lot of cases resources, money. Um, but so we really need each other a lot. But I'm with you on that idea of the young people.
Yeah, great question and really interesting. I see who's first. Kevin, you go ahead and then Betsy's next.
All right. Hi, everybody. Roger, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, hi, Kevin.
I was with you on one of the meditations of your group recently.
Well, thanks. Thanks for
Nice.
coming.
So I retired from working full time a couple years ago, and I've had a lot more time to be reading books and just learning stuff. There's so many interesting things happening, especially like maybe not in printed form, but like podcasts and stuff on YouTube. Chuck has been a very good guide to me because he's really into a lot of this stuff. So I read your book and I found it really fascinating. And since then, Chuck has led me to some other people that I've been listening to. There's a podcast called The Great Simplification. I don't know if anybody else has been listening to that, or if you're familiar with that, Roger.
I'm not. Who is it?
There's a guy named Nate Hagens.
Okay, I know Nate Hagens. I've listened to some
Yeah.
of his stuff.
And then there's another guy that he's interviewed a number of times who's also extremely interesting person. Daniel Schmachtenberger.
Mm-hmm.
Familiar with him?
Amazing guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Really
They all are. There's so much
he's really a
amazing.
brilliant character.
Yeah.
Every time I listen to him, it's like, oh my God, this guy is like 100 years ahead of everybody else. But the big question, like our local group here, you're looking at a lot of the key people here in Simply Living. Marilyn was one of the persons that founded it. Ellen, hello, Ellen. It's great to see you. And Chuck, Eugene, people, everyone, we've all been involved in Simply Living for a long time. It's mostly older people. Now there's not a lot of young people in the group. And like, from my perspective, I'm just speaking for myself, it seems like, and I owned a solar company. I was in the business world. I was, doing all that. One thing I think that's like really important, there's really two questions here. One is, the big question is, okay, here we are, in our current state of affairs as humans on the earth, the big picture, there's a lot of problems. We have this huge population. We're gobbling up all the resources. I'm like wondering, how do I use my time to make a difference? What can I really do that's going to have an impact? I'm finding that, renewable energy is really important. I think land conservation is a really important thing to be doing because, we're losing species, or the insect population's going down, all this stuff that's going to, it's like the material worldview does not work anymore because we're killing ourselves. It's not going to we can't keep going like this. It's not sustainable. We all know that this is not a sustainable trajectory. The train is running away. We're going to crash at some point. So the big question, like I think that probably is the motivating force for a lot of us is just what can we do with our life energy to make a difference? And I think we're all finding different ways to do that. But I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is, and this I'm reflecting too on my experience, as being part of Simply Living, is like, how do we get the message out to more people? How do you have an impact? And I think, one thing that actually really works is marketing, marketing and advertising. It actually works. It works. So it takes money. So, there have probably for like to get this message. I think there's a lot of people like looking for this kind of information. think there's people are very curious. I mean, especially younger people, I think, are trying to figure out like how can we. Or maybe some people are completely oblivious. A lot of people are oblivious, but I think there are a lot of young people, like we just talked about, who, you know, they can just sense it. Like I have two daughters. They're trying to make sense of their lives, and they're trying to figure out what, do they want to have children or not have children? These are all, it's important stuff. So I think the thing that you're focused on, Roger, and like Simply Living has been focused on for so many years, is really very important. And I think there needs to be, more conversations about like how can we use our human intelligence and our human experience to, work together, like the planetary consciousness, exactly what you're talking about. Forget about everything else. We're in the red zone now. Things are gonna, it's looking really bad. What can we do? So any comments about that, and anybody else wants to chime in, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, so well put. And you just hit right at some of the deep questions that a lot of people that I'm working with are asking. But we know that we have this vision, and one thing I'll say about people like Nate Higgins and Daniel Schmachtenberger, they are really, really nailing like the problem, the disaster. But I think a lot of people are ready to get like that's a given now. And the question I raise is how? How are we going to? If you look at the UN's sustainability goals, those are like what? Like this is the world we want. Yeah, I want social justice. I want harmony with nature. But how do we actually go from, what am I going to wake up tomorrow morning and work on? Like you said, Kevin. I wish I had a simple answer in our organization you could just plug in and. But I think that again, what's happening is these conversations are going on. And I think we just got to keep that going. And I hope that today is the beginning of some conversations I'm going to be having with you all going forward. The main thing I am focused on personally that calls me and keeps me up at night is something I'm called the GEM initiative. That an acronym has sort of taken hold, but the Global Education and Media. So the idea that we have all these people with great messages and the work you guys are doing. I mean, that's a story that should be brought out to the world, but nobody has the capacity to do the marketing, create the messaging. And so we are trying, I'm having serious conversations with people around the world about trying to create some kind of a structure where we get big resources like billionaire funding and be able to then fund the work that's going on. And so tell the stories. If you guys want to make, I mean, you really should be, there should be a documentary on what you've done. It's so beautiful. And, that's probably hard. We have the same capacity problems ourselves. And so final thought on that is, in my organization, if you look at our digital resources, it's kind of impressive. My colleague Steve is really brilliant and has built all this stuff. But we're not having any real impact in the world, nor is any organization at all. And I was at a team meeting yesterday, and I just said to everybody, we as our organization standing alone are not going to have any major impact, nor is Holo Movement or Interdevelopment Goals or Pro-Social World or any by themselves. The impact we're going to have is going to be proportional to how much we can build this connective ecosystem among people, among the organizations, and to share this vision. I see it as a movement. Somehow you say, I'm in. What is it that we all feel like we're in? That's a good marketing question, but I think that's happening, and that's what I'm working on. I'm not sure how to tell you how to plug into that, but just let's stay in touch and figure out how to work together. It's about collaboration. So
I have one more comment. So Marilyn, I liked your thing you put in the chat there. I think the last podcast that I listened to from Nate Higgins, he brought up something I think is really important. And I think, seems like your group, the Planet Project, is like trying, really thinking about this too, is like, talking about the evolution of consciousness, or you want to call it maybe the spiritual aspect of being human. Maybe that's the place to start. Like you said, at the real root of it is, some spiritual aspect. Like Nate Higgins was saying, maybe the most important thing is focusing on that rather than, all the external manifestations of the problems and stuff. I mean, that's important too, but do you have any comments about, like keeping a positive, viewpoint and like focusing on, he was just saying there's so much trauma in the world. Like pretty much everybody in Western culture is like, just living in Western culture is living with a lot of trauma, and people are uncovering that more and more. Any comments about that piece?
Well, yeah, I mean, healing is a very big theme. I touch on that in my last chapter, and there's so much healing that needs to happen. But yeah, I think just trying to spread the vision about what planetary is, and it ultimately, I mean, the main feature is this connectedness or this entanglement that we really are all together in this with the life and the planet. Um, you can go to quantum physics or ecology or indigenous wisdom, so many places, and like that is emerging. And I think young people have a higher sense of connectedness. Um, they're just not recognizing it, and but again, I think just going forward with the conversations is it's emerging, it's happening, it's a flow, it's not a one thing. I think there's nothing wrong with picking a cause and go volunteer with 350.org or Nature Conservancy or whatever, as long as you put your energy to something. And this thing tomorrow night, my colleague Steve is doing that I invite all of you to attend, this journey to activation, he calls it. But I've been thinking a lot lately about this idea of activation. And I think all of us here are pretty activated. And it's kind of the question of what is the new human that we are to be. And I think that our gift that we're moving into is, I like to call it agency, but it means realizing that you really do have a power to make changes in the world, to influence people, and you can use it or not, or you can use it for bad purposes or whatever. But moving into our agency, which really kind of being activated, it's that very question, Kevin, that you asked, like, what can I do? I'm ready. My heart is there. I want to serve. I'm in a place in life, where I can do that. So that thing Steve has designed is sort of for people to become activated, but then there's a whole other, what about all the people who really are activated? And the next stage is to connecting, and that's what we're doing, I think.
Thank you.
I'll just make a quick thing, and then Betsy, you're next. So you can unmute, get ready. I just wanted to say that, and I had sent these slides that we used to use with Meet Simply Living. People could come in and we show the slides and just talk about the history of Simply Living and what we've done. Most of you have probably seen those. That's what I sent to Roger. And one of the things we talk about is the 3 themes that Marilyn came up with some years ago. But it reflects why people connect with Simply Living. And one is greening the earth. People want to be ecologically aware and change, get in sync with that. The other is simplifying your life, kind of self-explanatory. That itself is a very underestimated power, a superpower to simplify your life. And I talked about Simply Living all the time, and sometimes I just say, well, look at the title, Simply Living. What does that mean? We don't need this insane consumer culture. But the third reason I mentioned this is that if you think of healing to wholeness was another category. And so there's a guy like Kevin Eigel that ran a business and installed 500 solar panels, ran a permaculture ecological farm, organic farm. And there's those kinds of obvious things. But then there's also, and this relates to the overall question you had, Kevin, is that, or when Roger talks about healing to wholeness is really, everybody has to take that journey too. I was going to say, Kevin's wife ran a yoga studio for many years. Yoga, Reiki, energy healing, alternative medicine. There's a whole world out there where people are bumping up against the insanity of treating everything as, unrelated. Those are ways to become wholeness. And, we mentioned the pharmacology, the entheogram, the, plant-based hallucinogens. I see all these, Michael Pollan talking about reaching a wide audience, explaining, and he's got that on video on YouTube too, by the way, some great series of explanations of how that's, I think the resurgence of that research and medical aspects of dealing with trauma, dealing with PTSD and all those sorts of things that are rooted in the fragmentation and the need for healing. Okay, I know, talk too much. Betsy.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Roger, for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure.
It's says a whole bunch of, who you are. So thank you. I really appreciate what Marilyn put in the chat. And I guess for me, and I think for, many of us who are elders now, I feel like I've been in this for a really long time, and we've seen movements, and we've seen the uphills and then the downhills and the uphills and the downhills and the uphills and the downhills. And actually, I know my daughters have lived through it through me and their father. And so as much as we talk about these positive emerging movements, I'm also seeing the decay, the destruction, the hopelessness, the suicide, the starvation, the wars, nuclear war. So two of my questions is, how much time do we have till we self-destruct? Youth, and Chuck knows this, every time we talk, I raise the issue of youth and cultural diversity, which in Columbus is I think we're a very segregated city culturally. And it's not to say that never the twain shall meet, but it's pretty amazing to me, having lived on the East Coast, how segregated Columbus is. Youth tend to, from my experience, ride waves, so they're going to be the energetic ones or the despondent ones. It's kind of like toddlers. They have two switches, on and off. Well, that's what I think youth have as well. So my question is, how much time do we have? And why do you think 2024 is fundamentally different than the 1960s or the 80s or wherever you were, and it seemed like the momentum was really moving quickly and going to go someplace? So argue with me out of my despondency.
Well, I think you're right. Both things are going on. The collapse is happening. It's not like we're waiting for it to happen. Has started. You know, I think we all know that. We are the ones that are seeing that and need to be focused on building a new world. And it doesn't matter how, I'm not going to say how much time we have. It makes no difference to me. It's the same thing that we have to do. As fast as we can, as much as we can, we have to get the young people engaged. It doesn't matter whether it's a year or 10 years. So what it's going to look like, I talked to a lot of smart people that seem to feel like something pretty catastrophic may be looming. But again, I don't care. You know, to speculate. Like what I have to wake up and do is the same no matter what. So I think we all just need to choose, you know, in a way, which side am I on? Have I given up or am I still activated? And looking, there's not an easy answer. There's not a recipe. It's not a program, but and ready to engage. And I'll just say the most important thing now is engaging and connecting. Why is it different? For one thing, like that we can be talking across the United States. And I've had conversations all day long with people around the world because of this technology. So that's a game changer. The low hanging fruit, again, is that we do have these tools that are reaching large numbers of people. And my goodness, right now, I think all of us are Americans. Here, you know, Trump is polling higher than Biden. How does that happen? Well, that's because, you know, their minds have been taken over essentially by these tools. So that's the example that I cite of like what we could be doing. I do not see any billionaires like the Kochs and the Mercers and the Murdochs, you know, saying, let's push forward this agenda, except that this one would be for the benefit of all, you know, for well-being, which you can define. You know, why is this agenda better? You know, Hitler, I suppose, thought his agenda was the right thing. I think you can really frame things in terms of the well-being of all people. And if you put that down against, you know, anything else, the Third Reich or Trump, you know, it's pretty easy to. This is the sense of truth that I think that our hearts give us is we know what's right. If it hurts other people, that's not right, you know. So
core values.
Yeah.
I'll just say, I'm writing a piece now about poverty, and I've been involved in, well, Betsy mentioned we're the second most economically segregated city in the country. Austin is number one. So interesting. And Paul Hawken and Matthew Desmond wrote this book called Poverty, by America, and BY. But you know, we have half the people that, you know, don't have $400 to deal with a parking ticket or whatever. You know, all these statistics on. Okay, that's half the population roughly that we can't get engaged. They don't have the. So you know, his thing is take care of, you know, address poverty. Everybody should be a poverty abolitionist and recognize that this is ridiculous, having poor people, period, richest country in the world. So, you know, getting on that piece is an important relative to our goals, our bigger goals, is to getting everyone engaged. And we're losing all these people that have just been ignored by the Democratic Party, not to get political there, but, you know, we pretend we don't know why. There's Trumpism. You ignore people long enough, they're gonna, whatever, read Thomas Frank. Anyway, who is next? I think did you want to add something, Eugene? Is that who else? Feel free to pop up. Oh, okay, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I am not part of this group, so thank you for allowing me to be a part of it, and thank you, Roger. I had a question in regards to the change in human consciousness when it comes to AI. You've talked about, you know, even just the capability of being able to Zoom and talk to people across the world with things like ChatGPT and AI really being compared to the significance of electricity. Um, how do you think that's going to impact the change in human consciousness with everyday people being able to have that access?
Yeah, I think we're very far down that spectrum already, and the phenomenon of all the the lies that are being spread. That's the fear with AI, is you can create lies so easily, whatever they may be, in words or in images. Um, and so that's why we have 74 million people voting for Trump in 2020. So my smart friends tell me that, boy, this is a whole new level of it. It's going to get much worse. But I just feel like it's already really serious. I mean, when I was growing up, the big fear was nuclear war, and somehow we escaped that. I think this is every bit as serious, if not more, but it's a slow boiling pot. So it's not so obvious. I think the big lesson of what this transition is about, and this has to do with the work of Arthur Young, especially, talks about this, and I mentioned him in my book. That's a whole nother world. It's pretty mind-boggling. But he spoke of the fourth stage as the one in which we master causality. And that means that is what science is. We've figured out how to put rockets to the moon and create nuclear reactions and make electrons do whatever in digital world. And it's given us tremendous power, obviously. So our tools, the stone tools that began 3 million years ago, is just that same spectrum. So now, obviously, our tools can kill us, and that's what we've done. We're either going to slowly pollute our environment or do it all in a nuclear detonation. And so the big question is not that any tool is bad or good. That's the thing about AI or whatever. It's, can we have the wisdom to use them properly? Which means for the good, back to the very simple value of for the benefit of all. So AI can do tremendous things. Nuclear energy can do tremendous things. Gene splicing, although that one really scares me. But so it's just about developing the wisdom or the consciousness, really. It comes back to that. But yet I am very, very concerned about the whole media environment now. And that's why I feel like we need to jump into that and provide some alternatives of the vision and the stories of what the world can be. That is such a powerful tool. Why aren't we using it for good purposes? Why don't we use AI for good purposes? And so I don't know if I answered your question, but that.
Yes, I like the idea that it's a tool and that it's not necessarily a negative mindset, and that we can use that to be able to entice young people, people of color, people, I try to observe, and I'm involved in a lot of different things kind of in this field, and I see the same, I hate to say it, but the same kind of population. We're not reaching a wide variety of people. And I think in order to change collectively, there has to be a belief system or a viewpoint from a bigger group of people outside of just us. So it's like, how does that happen?
Right. That's the right question. That's the big question.
So we kind of have to use those tools.
Yeah. That's what I've concluded, that's the only way. And it's sitting there. It reminds me of that joke about the man stranded on his roof in a big flood, and he says, God is going to save me. And all these different people, a helicopter comes by and he waves them all on because God's going to save him. And finally he drowns and he says, God, why did you do this to me? He said, well, I sent the helicopter, I sent the boats. You didn't step up and
you didn't do it.
Recognize it. So as much as in my organization, we call that the media machine, the brothel, but it's like, we just have to enter the brothel. We just have to get in there and use it for good purposes. So, yeah.
Okay. It's 10 after 8, and if you're available a little longer, Roger,
It's such a great discussion. I can stick around it.
Great. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, Roger, with our masterclass with DSW, I hope you've maintained a relationship with Alan Honig with Human Energy, because I had a nice interview with him. And Chuck, I mentioned our Friday group to Alan to see if sometime in 2024, Alan would be interested in joining our group. We got Dr. John Duvall, who's a playwright out in California. So this whole marketing, we've got to have Alan on board. And I had a really great talk with him. So when we're talking about raising funds and the marketing, Alan's got to be part of our team. I assume that you've probably nurtured that relationship, Roger.
I would say I tried to. And this is part of my experience in this ecosystem I said I've kind of fallen into. I did reach out to some of these major organizations, which I would consider Human Energy, Pro Social. And there is a kind of a profile I had to kind of learn this, but some of these more successful organizations kind of feel like they've got their program dialed. And, they do have funding. They are producing videos and it is impressive compared to our little organization. And they don't really like, who are you? Kind of attitude, like they don't really get that it's not going to be you that has the answer. And so I have very much a sense of the Human Energy fell into that. And I did my interview with Alan as well. And, he did what he needed to do, but I actually had a conversation with Ben Casera too, the founder of that. And, but just didn't, those have to be revisited, but I can tell the difference between people who are eager to collaborate, and it doesn't matter who you are. That's why, all of us are nobodies that are moved, activated. I feel like there's sort of an in crowd, that's out there. And there's a lot of people marketing themselves. And if they talk to you, they want to know that you're going to be able to advance their program or sign up for their thing or donate money to them. And it's a very different mindset that I'm working in, and it is emerging. So Alan, I would love to work with Alan. Actually, I'm connected with 3 or 4 other filmmakers of probably, at least his skill level and status. And so there's no shortage of filmmakers, but it's like, who are the willing that really want to come together and find some common messaging. So like, Human Energy, they've got their whole framework mostly around the noosphere and, spreading that idea. And if you can support that, they love you. But if you just want to collaborate and say, like, how can we create something bigger than any of us? I've gotten a lot of crickets, I'll say.
Well,
Not a lot. Some.
Through Chuck and our Friday group, if Alan does join us at some point and we feel like he is receptive, I mean, like Chuck, I loved your book, right? So I think what we're doing with Simply Living and what Chuck and I are doing kind of with a group that we've been working with for a couple of years, we sure see a fit for you in our group too. So if there's any way we can help facilitate that relationship with Alan, we certainly will.
Well, that would be great. I mean, I'm all for it. I feel like, well, yeah, maybe you could sort of amend that. There's going to be kind of this initiative firming up, and Alan might get interested in that. As far as I could tell, I mean, he works for Human Energy. They pay him. That he's not looking for the additional things unless it's paid work. But let's stay with that.
Great, thanks, Alan.
I would just add that Simply Living has been affiliated with the Rob Hopkins Transition Town Network for many years. So we have a affiliation with various groups in Central Ohio that are separate from Simply Living, but are doing sustainability work in their communities. And so Paul has been on the national level of the transition, thinking about, kind of the big picture. And we have a group, the Friday group is looking at the design of what we're calling a rural resilient hub. Kind of hard to say, rural and resilient at the same time, but the idea that we have several communities that are in different states that are doing really exemplary work, and kind of synthesize that into a kind of a model that can be useful for small towns and dealing with all the kinds of issues that we're talking about here, but on the ground level. It is getting later. Eugene, did you still want to add something? Oh, I see Lynn has her hand up. Let's get the women here first. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say I really enjoyed this and thank you so much, because as president of the board for Simply Living, I deal with this all the time. It's like the concept is very complicated. Our mission is very not complicated, but very large, and we're called Simply Living. But when I'm on the ground and meeting with people, the youth want this. They understand even more of why it's important, and others just see so much. But it's also this instant gratification of need for our society right now, and people don't really understanding how to where action can happen. And also, I think the other thing is, after hearing a story today about billionaires finding their hideaways, building their hideaways all over the world, that they do not understand, that the grass tops do not understand that they need the grassroots, and that if they truly want their own sustainability, even for their stakeholders, stockholders, or whoever their sustainability is, that there has to be that collaboration. And I think that's what really beats people down, and that's what that causes in the media to it becomes shown up in a lot of ways. So I'm very pleased and making tons of notes, because Simply Living is trying to say, how do we evolve as the kind of organization that was formed, and on very lovely very lovely reasons why. But to hear the one Betsy left, but um, those that they may not known about the 60s and the 80s, but they are all here now because, and they know that they are here now because of the things that happened in the past. They just don't know how also to take that into the future, how them to be the future. I hear people very, yes, they respect what has happened in the past, and even simple things like looking at how much of our food cooking should be remembered and honoring what came over from Africa, in terms of people bringing so many tools and things. So it's, if you don't have that, it just, there is a lot of honoring for the past. They don't know how, all don't have a point of reference to understand it all, but they do understand that they have those. Now how did they be the next wave to keep things getting done? And that is, I think, all of our challenges. How do we educate, help lead the hand and get people caught up in doing things? I really do appreciate this evening, and I really loved also your graphics, because we do have to simplify things. The one with the cloud of all the different things, the challenges, and I usually do start out my little welcome to Simply Living, and if you're feeling guilty that you're not green enough and all those things, then you're letting the corporations win. Because I feel like we always have to make them laugh and make them kind of not feel so guilty that they're not doing enough. Okay. But I do believe, because they are more educated, they have learned of what they don't know. So thank you. And I look forward to sharing those graphics on Simply Living's website.
Thanks for those words. Very well said.
So thank you all very much. It's helped me to focus on important things for Simply Living. So thank you.
So Eugene, you want the last word? You're muted. Yeah, you gotta unmute.
Gene, you're
Yeah, Rod, me having a background in physics, I'm fascinated by the concept of Einstein's spooky action at a distance, i.e. quantum entanglement. And I'm wondering if anyone's discussed, anybody in the scientific community is relating the quantum theory to consciousness, perhaps a collective consciousness of all living things all over the universe. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because I think the only way we're going to get out of our dilemma is to be able to tap into a higher consciousness, another level that we haven't attained yet. What do you think about this?
Love it. Yeah, a lot of physicists, there's a lot of talk about consciousness being outside of ourselves and the brain being more like a radio receiver. And um, I like to, I'm going to tell like just a quick story about Nikola Tesla that I would tell to people who are sort of the doubters of the materialists or whatever. But so Tesla invented the induction motor, which is what electric cars use. It can both be a motor and a generator. When you coast and go backwards, it makes electricity. And he tells this story that when he was back in Croatia or wherever he came from, like 1880 or something, he was out on the town square with his brother and had this debilitating episode of blinding light, and like he was just on the ground for like 10 minutes or something. But in the course of that, he received the full blueprints of the induction motor, which he then built absolutely according to spec and did that. Now, I think that's true myself. Now, the materialists would say, oh, he's just making that up, or like, oh, I don't know, how do you explain that away? But I think it is true, and I think it shows that there is an entire sort of underlying field of information, if you like. I can tell you this book, I mean, I had to put the words down, and that was agonizingly hard because I'm a writer, but I was just channeling that, and I think many things are like that. So the physicists talk a lot about an underlying field, a unified field. There's the Akashic field idea. Irvin Laszlo writes a lot about that. I'm a big fan of his. So, yeah, there's, what is consciousness? I think it's pretty widely acknowledged that it's not just about the brain. The brain has a role, and I think it does do this filtering of all this information coming in and really creates our experience of the world that we believe in, reality as we think it is. But it's much bigger. And that's part of the connectedness, I think, too, that we're all sort of sourcing the same field. So, long answer to an innocent question.
It's the correct answer.
Yeah, we stayed in Nikola Tesla's room in the Hotel New Yorker a few years ago,
Oh,
and
that was right.
his lab was right next door in the room next door.
When he was thriving, because the last part of his life is sad.
Yeah. But
He was.
no, his lab was in the hotel, the same floor.
Oh, okay.
You could just walk to it, and
Yeah.
all these photos of him, and I was hoping to get some channeling from him sleeping in his room, but I wasn't aware of it. I'm sorry.
Amazing character.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Roger.
the right side of the brain is the connector. And I know, I guess, a child of the 60s, I experimented with psychedelic drugs, chewed peyote buttons, and had the psilocybin, whatever. And I think that's how I just recently discovered this guy, Richard Flyer. I think I mentioned him to you, Roger. I don't know if you had a chance to look at his work, but Richard Flyer, Flyer, he has a similar kind of vision and wants to mentor people like us to make the changes that are needed. But he depends heavily on the idea of the spiritual connection, that everybody is connected to this higher power. And I can be labeled a New Ager. Okay, I think there's a skepticism about it, which relates directly to the age of separation, the materialism worldview. I think it's incorrect, and I think physicists have been leaders, and many the interest in international faith-based systems, like I learned about Baha'i today. Paul knows, and I'm a Unitarian Universalist myself, and I think that that's all part of the evolution of consciousness. And I think these powerful drugs are, under the right conditions. And I will say, I was never a party drug guy. I read all the stuff from Berkeley, California. I read about set and setting, and I think if you tune yourself to those kinds of things, the same for reading spiritual stuff. I don't know. I've read it all. I had a wife who died of cancer, and my daughter recently died of cancer. I have an intimate relationship with that level of passage into the greater universe. This is not a good way to end things, but I want to. I think if people have last words to say, go ahead and say them. Go ahead, Paul.
My last word, since this is being taped, on page 262, Roger, you wrote, modern science, Eastern mysticism, and indigenous wisdom are coming together as planetary spirituality. I absolutely love that. So I think, so I think for those that haven't read your book or listening in on that, I think that tells it all. And do you want to respond any at all to that sentence? I think that's
well,
really
yeah, I still stand by that story, and we didn't even touch on the indigenous piece here today, and I'm really eager to try to figure out how to connect into that, to bring that piece in. We know the what the wisdom is, but how to bring the culture and the people in more. So if you have any ideas, I'd just like to say I hope this is a beginning and not an ending. So I'm very open. I'm available. Maybe I'll rely on Chuck to carry this forward, but feel free to. I kind of live by email. If you want to reach me, that's the best way. Chuck's got my email address. It's going to take all of us. I think the last sentence of my book is we've got to find each other and come together. So,
yeah. David Rushkoff, forget his first name. That's what you find the others. We need to, and we're findable. I think. Well, we have some great opportunities locally. We have a large community festival every year, and we have a lot of infrastructure around the community here to build it and grow it. But we need to spread the word more widely to people who we know are out there. Anyway, I will thank Roger again. It's been delightful. I know everybody here appreciated it, and I see Marcia came in with Kevin because it was so good she couldn't resist. Anyway, thanks to everybody, and
thanks everyone.
I will close it out and turn the. If I can do this. Stop.